to start the second session of the day, which is on modern challenges to teaching evolution, which for our purposes are going to be the intelligent design movement. And first up to talk is going to be Barbara Forrest, Professor Emerita at Southeastern Louisiana University, who's going to be talking about Creationism's Trojan horse, the Wedge of intelligent design.
For those of you youngsters in the audience, it's been 20 years since the Dover trial, so I'm going to give you a quick and dirty history of the intelligent design movement, or fast and furious, whichever you want to call it, but it's going to be fast because there's a lot to cram in 30 years into 25 minutes. So if you're interested in the details about the intelligent design movement, the book that I co-authored with Paul Gross is still in print. I mean, you can get used copies, and believe me, it's still current. Nothing has changed. It is still the same business that it was when we wrote the book and published it in 2004. So you can get used copies of it if you want the details. But the Trojan horse itself is in Seattle, Washington, where the Discovery Institute is headquartered. And these are the people who are primarily the leaders of this movement. I'll mention a few by name, and then there's one that will come up later. Bruce Chapman founded the Discovery Institute in about 1990 or 91. Stephen Meyer is the director of the Center for Science and Culture, the creationist arm of the Discovery Institute. It was formerly called the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, as you see, but it's presently the Center for Science and Culture. John West is the managing director. Paul Nelson is a CSC fellow and their resident young earth creationist. Intelligent design is old earth creationism, just so you know. That will come up again. Philip Johnson was sort of the father figure and the advisor to the movement. He passed away in 2019, but his influence was huge. Jonathan Wells also passed away. So 2 of them are deceased, and actually 3. Walter Bradley just passed away recently, a few days ago. He was one of the founders of this organization, too, this movement. Michael Behe, you probably have heard of. He's a microbiologist, and his work will come up again as well. And William Dembski is a philosopher like me and a mathematician, and he's the public intellectual. He's the intellectual face of this movement, working with Behe to get this out to the public. And then there's Casey Luskin, who's kind of their utility infielder. He has been with the organization off and on for about 20 years, and now he's actually associate director of the Center for Science and Culture. He will come up again as well. So the Discovery Institute has very helpfully defined intelligent design, and they gave us the pronunciation as well, as you'll notice. It's the idea that living things are best explained by an intelligent cause and not an undirected process like natural selection. It also, according to them, refers to a scientific research program. That's false. Okay, there is no science. What they do is they take other people's science and they reinterpret it, to fit their own purposes. They don't do any original science, really. In 1996, working with Bruce Chapman, Stephen Meyer, they set up the creationist arm of the Discovery Institute, the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, which has an overtly an overtly religious picture as it's in its early logo on the website. And God creating Adam, Michelangelo's God, and it was called the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture. The first thing they needed to do was attract donors, and the document that you'll see in a minute was an internal fundraising document, so they needed money. And they were right up front about the religious underpinnings of what they were doing. You can see that they mentioned Western science being influenced by the idea that God is dead, right? So they needed a lot of money so they could give fellowships to scholars, hold conferences. They say disseminate research findings among opinion makers and the general public. This was never really about science. It was about getting to the public and influencing public policy. So the entire movement was built on this internal fundraising document. This is what they were using to raise money. It was called the Wedge, and it now is referred to as the Wedge strategy. You can download it. I was the one who, sitting up late at night, found evidence that this was their document. It was an internal document leaked onto the internet, and I authenticated it as something that came out of the Discovery Institute. And Philip Johnson had written it, and you can see there's the picture. He called this movement the Wedge to split open the log of naturalism to allow room for supernatural explanations in science. Now, they didn't put it exactly that way, but that's what he meant. Because if you exclude naturalism, the only thing you've got to appeal to is the supernatural. So the Wedge strategy was to be carried out in phases. First, scientific research, writing, and publicity. Phase 2, publicity and opinion making. Phase 3, cultural confrontation and renewal. Well, they went right to phase 2 and phase 3. Of course, they never did any science. They went right to the publicity part. But the bedrock goal of this movement was to get intelligent design creationism into public schools. So this is the first page of the document. You can see there's the religious picture. There's the reference to God creating humans in his image as a bedrock principle of Western civilization, and their goal of replacing materialist science, as they call it, with a science consonant with Christian and theistic convictions. So there was never any doubt among their supporters, their potential donors themselves, that this was about religion, right? It was about religion. So what I used in the Dover trial, really, they gave me all my best material because all I had to do was use their own words, right? And so Philip Johnson actually defined intelligent design as theistic realism or mere creation, the idea that God is objectively real as creator. Dembski says intelligent design is just the logos theology of John's gospel restated in the idiom of information theory. That comes right out of the book of John. Now, why the book of John? You know, John 1:1, there's this beautiful passage, in the beginning was the Word was, okay. Well, they didn't want to fight with the young earth creationists over the book of Genesis, but they wanted him in their big tent, right? So what they did was, okay, we'll biblically base it, we'll just move it into the New Testament. So that's what they did. So they wouldn't have to fight over the age of the earth. The only thing the intelligent design people did in changing creationism, they got rid of the young age of the earth and they got rid of the Noah's flood thing. Everything else they kept. So they just based it in the New Testament, John 1:1. Now this guy is important simply because he gives us beautiful evidence that they all understood that intelligent design was creationism. Dean Kenyon was a biology professor at San Francisco State University in the 80s, and he got into trouble up there for teaching young earth creationism in his biology classes. And that was in the 80s. Well, in the 80s, he wrote an affidavit in support of the creationists in the case of Edwards v. Aguillard, which came out of my state of Louisiana, in which the state was requiring high schools to teach creation science every time evolution was taught, right? And so he wrote an affidavit in favor of the creationists, saying that creation science is just as scientific as evolution. This is important because you'll see the continuity in his positions, and it carries all the way through to intelligent design. Well, he became the co-author in 1989 of a textbook of pandas and people. You'll see that again in a little while, too. And that was a creationist textbook. And in 1997, he joined as one of the founding fellows of the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture. Now, in 2000, in an interview with a Catholic publication, he actually pointed out that scientific creationism is one of the intellectual antecedents of intelligent design. I mean, what more could you want? I mean, if you need evidence, you've got it right there, right? And that's what I had, and that's what I used. Okay, so, but they nonetheless kept presenting this as a scientific research program. And so Dr. Behe has this little thing about the bacterial flagellum, which you probably all know what that is. I don't have to tell you, right? Okay. So you got this little, he has this little cartoon that he uses, and he uses, you know, the E. coli as the example of a little tail that helps it swim that is irreducibly complex. If you take out, if any of the parts are missing, it's not going to work, which means that it could not have been built up by evolutionary processes over millions and millions of years. All the parts had to be put in place at the same time for it to function. But then this guy, he also compares it to a mousetrap, right? He says it's like a mousetrap. If you take any of the parts away, it's not going to work. But then this guy named Ken Miller comes along, and he says, well, yes, it will. It will work. You can take it all apart, and you can find some function for every piece of it. It's functional, maybe not as a mousetrap, but it's functional. This is what he's talking about. that little tail, that little flagellum, if it's missing some of its parts, it still has a function. It can be a toxin injector that can make you really sick, right? It can give you bubonic plague, it can give you salmonella or E. coli. So it has a function. So this was easily and very quickly debunked. But nonetheless, Dr. Behe still continues, even now, to promote the idea of irreducible complexity. What's interesting is that it's an old young earth creationist idea. It comes from Ariel Roth, who's a young earth creationist, who talked about complex integrated structures. He was applying it at the level of the body, the organ systems of the body. You know, if you take the lungs out, the body as an organic system will cease to function. Well, yeah, that's right, okay? But what Behe did was to apply it at the level of the cell, and to change the terminology a little bit, he calls it irreducible complexity and applies it at the level of the cell. If you remove any of the parts of you know, let's say a bacterial flagellum, it'll cease to function. Okay, but we now know that that's just an old creationist idea, and of course, Behe is incorrect about that. So intelligent design in a nutshell. William Dembski defined it beautifully. He gave his own position. He says, I'm an old earth creationist trying to preserve Christian orthodoxy within an old earth perspective. There you go, right? And absolutely, it's the same thing it was in 1996, and I haven't seen, this is Dr. Dembski today, and I haven't seen any evidence that he has changed his position on this at all. And he summed it up beautifully for the rest of us. So the goal of the Wedge strategy was to get into the public schools, which Philip Johnson had been saying all along. Change the subject, let's talk about it a little bit differently, get the reality of God, intelligent design, the reality of God into the schools. That's the goal, that was the bedrock goal all along. So to further that goal, in 1999, this was 3 years after the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture was established, they produced a legal guidebook, Intelligent Design in Public School Science Curricula, showing, in their view, how they could make a case that intelligent design is constitutional. Now this is, of course, to advance their goal of getting intelligent design into public schools. And so in the Wedge document, in phase 3, they actually talk about getting legal, this is to their donors, keep in mind, they're talking to people that they want to give them money. This is to their donors. We're going to pursue legal assistance. And I didn't give you the full quote. Okay, what this says is legal assistance in case we run into resistance, okay, to the integration of design theory in public schools. We're going to, you know, we'll help you out legally. So we need money, you know, for that. Now this book is still being advertised on Stephen Meyer's website. It's still on stephenmeyer.com, .org, pardon me. So it's still something that they consider to, you know, they want to promote. So my job, you can see all the wonderful material they were giving me for when I, you know, ended up as an expert witness in the Kitzmiller case. And so my job was to explain to the judge what the Wedge strategy was about, number one, and number two, to talk about what PANDAS really was. So I've given you a little bit of information about the Wedge strategy, a little bit about PANDAS. You're going to hear more about this from Ken. Okay, he's going to follow up with this, so I won't elaborate too much, except to say that my job was to explain, of course, examine the Wedge document. But also, I had to look at all the drafts that were subpoenaed, all the early drafts of the PANDAS book, okay? And so I forget how many there were, 5 or 6? Something like that. I mean, I had them all in my office on my desk. And so, the first draft of this book that became the PANDAS book was called Biology and Creation. Okay, that's obviously a creationist title. And you can see in there outlined in green, that's creationist language. They refer to creation over and over and over. Now, they were watching that Edwards v. Aguillard case progress through the courts coming out of Louisiana. They were watching that. And so that decision was handed down in 1987, that you cannot teach creation science in a public school. It's unconstitutional. So what they did, they said, well, we better change some stuff, you know. We can't publish this book as it is. Well, they changed the title to Of Pandas and People. They also began, now keep in mind, these manuscripts were done on those old dot matrix printers, you know, when it was still pretty primitive technology. And so that's what I was looking at. And of Pandas and People in 1993, by that time, after the Edwards decision came down, they went in and tried to take out all the creationism words and put in intelligent design. That's what they did. Except, one day I was sitting in my office and I was going through one of the manuscripts, and I found there had been the word creationist. You see the old type? It's a primitive-looking typeface. Well, somebody tried to do a search and replace that word with design proponents, and they didn't quite get all of it out, and this is what they ended up with. And so this was, of course, the missing link. First thing I did was call NCSC, and we just had a little happy party, about this. What's amazing is we didn't use this in court. I wish we had. I just kind of fell through the cracks because we had so much stuff, we didn't even need it. But boy, if we had, I think the trial would have ended that day. Okay. So what did the Discovery Institute do? Well, the very next month, the decision was December 05, and the very next month, January 06, in their newsletter, Discovery Institute Views, they announced their new front. And it would be academic freedom. We're going to promote academic freedom. All right, now let me tell you, this is also an old young earth creationist thing. This was not new, but it was the only thing they had left. So they would now fight for academic freedom. So they came out with what they call their model academic freedom bills. Now this is how it looks today in 2025, but it's been up there for a good long time, various iterations of this bill. But it was model legislation that they were promoting around the country to try to get states to pass this so that they could get around the Kitzmiller decision. All right. What they had to do was start using code language. They couldn't use the term intelligent design anymore because they knew it was a legal liability. So what they started doing was using code language or euphemisms like let's teach the controversy about evolution or arguments for and against Darwinism. You can see it all up there. Well, the two that became relevant in my state of Louisiana were critical analysis of evolution and academic freedom. And I'll show you why that became relevant. In 2008, under Bobby Jindal as governor, one of the first things he signed in his first, and there's Casey, because Casey was spearheading this. First person I ran into at 8 o'clock in the morning one day down at the Capitol was Casey, when we were trying to stop the bill. What they did, Louisiana became the first state to pass one of these Discovery Institute's model bills. We were the first one. And so what they did, you can look and see that it just seems innocuous that they're letting teachers have the freedom to, they want to allow teachers to foster critical thinking skills, logical analysis, open and objective discussion of scientific theories and like evolution, global warming, human cloning, right? They're the code words, right? And you can see them in this other part of the bill. What they let teachers do is to bring in supplemental material. Now, this is not a mandatory bill. This is a permissive bill. And as far as we know, there have been no cases that have arisen as a result of this bill. I think teachers pretty much don't want to fool with it, but they can do it if they want. And so what they can do is bring in supplemental materials and analyze, critique, and review scientific theories. Now, that sounds harmless, right? Okay, but we know the history of this bill. And of course, there's the obligatory religion disclaimer. This is not about religion, right? Young earth creationists always did that, and the intelligent design people to continue to do that. This is not about religion. Well, if it weren't about religion, they wouldn't have to say that, right? Okay, but it is about religion. Now, here we go. There's a face up there you're going to recognize. Okay, yeah. This bill got passed. Casey Luskin was working with these guys. This bill got passed. It started as an effort by the Louisiana Family Forum, which is an arm of Focus on the Family in Louisiana. There's Reverend Gene Mills. And what happened was the Department of Education had to write up a draft policy for the bill to be implemented. That means this is how you implement the bill, a draft to be given to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. Now, the professionals in the Department of Education understood what this law was about, and they wrote into it a specific prohibition against introducing intelligent design material. Put it in there specifically, or any other creationist material. Well, Mike Johnson, who was a creationist ally of the Family Forum, and who was a lawyer at the time working, with the Alliance, it used to be the Alliance Defense Fund, now it's the Alliance Defending Freedom. He threatened to sue the state if that didn't come out, right? He wanted that language taken out, and he threatened to sue the state. This is just some excerpts from his bill. Oh, you wouldn't want costly, unnecessary litigation, would you? Fine. So that happened. West Virginia passed a bill very similar to that, okay? Cleaned up the language, right? And now it's just a seemingly innocuous bill. They passed it last year. What they wanted was to get this stuff into schools using this type of material, and they have lots of other stuff besides. Now, in the meantime, what have they been doing? Raising money. And they raised quite a bit. You can see in 2020 they raised almost $9 million. That was the pandemic year. 2021 they raised almost $12 million. And that same year they spent almost $12 million. And the Center for Science and Culture in the last 21 through 23 has consumed 77% of the Discovery Institute budget. And that's pretty much always been the case. So they've been raising a lot and spending a lot. What are they spending it on? Well, they spent $4 million in 21 buying property in Cambridge, England. They're starting something called the Discovery House, which is a kind of Discovery Institute UK. And so they bought this property for $4 million. All the people that you already know about are on the board of directors. There's their statement of their objectives. What's funny is in their statement of their objectives, they mentioned that they're about educating the public about a transcendent mind or creator behind the universe, August 2021. By December 2021, they kind of cleaned up the language and they took the word creator out. But they've started this outfit in the UK. And they're exporting the Wedge strategy, is what they're doing, as you'll see. They are giving research grants internationally to people that support them, research grants. They spent millions on research grants. They give a lot in the United States as well. They've got a Discovery Institute in Brazil, all right? It's been there for quite a while now. Last year they had an international in-person conference. They have supporters or affiliates in Italy, Poland, Austria, Norway, and the UK. And of course the Discovery Institute is the thing that binds them all together. They're also involved now in Africa, 5 countries in Africa. And they're giving these people that are free materials. There's Casey bringing books in Africa. Very active in Poland. In 22, they spent another $2.3 million buying more property somewhere in Europe. I don't know where it is. My guess is that it's in Poland. I'm just guessing because they're very active in Poland. They're having academic debates in Poland, just like they used to do here, what they were doing in Baylor in 2000 when I outed them as to who they were and what they were doing. Meanwhile, they're having overtly religious events in overtly religious venues like this in Denton, Texas, right? No science, overt religiosity. So what's new? The only thing I can find that's new is that they're now making the case that intelligent design is compatible with Catholicism. This is Ann Gager, who bills herself as a senior research scientist at the Biologic Institute, which no longer exists. It hasn't filed in 1099 since 2019, but it was their sort of research facility. But notice what they've put out. She edited this book, God's Grandeur. All the contributors are Catholic, and they've decided to make an explicit decision to name the designer as God. An explicit decision. Now that's the Catholic thing is new. So why are they doing this? Well, my idea is, they've stated one reason why they're doing it: to revitalize Catholic education. Which I guess they think needs to be revitalized. But as you know, Catholicism is compatible with evolution in the eyes of the church. But that's their stated purpose. And they're providing, materials and teacher training and stuff like that. So why are they doing? Well, you have their stated reason. I think other possibilities are that they want to expand their donor base. And also, they've pretty much failed in the U.S. in public schools, but they know the demographics of the current Supreme Court. They know that there are 5 conservative Catholic justices, and I think they're probably thinking, well, we can hedge our bets if we make the case that it's compatible. And of course, in many of these countries where they're expanding into, they're majority Catholic, so they're reaching out to that base as well. Okay, 3 consequential changes post-Kitzmiller. This is a downer. This is not happy stuff. It's just what I think, it's important to recognize. One is profound political changes, and that's at the federal and state level. My state of Louisiana, RFK Jr., I don't have to tell you who he is and what he's about. He was there a couple of weeks ago meeting with Dr. Ralph Abraham, who's the Surgeon General, and Governor Jeff Landry. In this picture, you see anti-science, quack science, pseudoscience all together in one picture in Louisiana. And this is the federal and the state level. Also, there's been a tremendous legal change. In Bremerton versus Kennedy, the Supreme Court, abandoned all of the precedents that Judge Jones was using in the Dover case, in the Kitzmiller ruling. The Lemon test, the endorsement test, those are gone. What are they using now? History and tradition, which means they can do anything in the world that they want, okay, and justify any ruling they want to give. Also, there's a cultural component here. Now, the clearly religious nature of ID is no longer a liability. It's an asset, the way things are now. Given who's running everything, it's an asset for them, I think. This is why Ann Gager could make a decision to name the designer as God. It's an asset. Louisiana's got a 10 Commandments bill. And yes, that is Mike Johnson's picture on the official government poster of what you have to hang in public school and university classrooms. He's, juxtaposed right next to Moses, right? This now, in the eyes of a lot of people who are running the country and the states, this is an asset. This is no longer a liability, okay? So again, nothing has changed as far as ID is concerned. And I know this is lame, but this is where I got my last slide. You remember how Paul Simon used to, said it's still crazy after all these years? Well, intelligent design is still creationism after all these years. Nothing has changed. Thank you.